Two people can survive the exact same tragedy. One spends the rest of their life quietly avoiding anything that reminds them of it, steering conversations away, flinching at certain dates, certain songs, certain smells. The other, somehow, builds an entire new life on top of that same wound, stronger, deeper, more alive than they were before it happened. Same tragedy. Two completely different outcomes. For a long time, nobody could explain why. Now, science finally can. And the answer has almost nothing to do with how strong a person is. Let's call her Elena. Not the same Elena from another story, a different one, a different life. This Elena was 26, driving home from a late shift when another car ran a red light and hit her passenger side going 40 miles an hour. She survived. Her best friend sitting beside her did not. For the first year afterward, Elena existed rather than lived. She stopped driving entirely. She quit the job she used to love because the route there passed the intersection. She smiled when people expected her to and cried alone in her car, the new one, the one she'd bought specifically because it didn't remind her of anything, at least twice a week, usually without knowing exactly why that particular day had cracked her open. Everyone around her called this understandable. It was understandable. Grief like that doesn't follow a schedule, and nobody expected Elena to simply move on. But somewhere around the 18-month mark, something shifted that even Elena herself couldn't fully explain at first. It didn't happen all at once. It happened the way most real transformations happen, quietly, in pieces, so slowly that she almost missed it while it was occurring. Here is the part almost nobody knows, even people who've lived through something enormous themselves. Psychologists have a name for what eventually happened to Elena. It's called post-traumatic growth, and it's one of the most quietly remarkable findings in the last several decades of psychology. For most of the 20th century, trauma research focused almost entirely on damage, what breaks, what gets lost, what never fully heals. And that research matters, suffering is real, and minimizing it helps no one. But in the 1990s, two researchers, Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, noticed something that didn't fit the existing story. A significant number of people who lived through genuinely devastating events, the death of a child, a cancer diagnosis, war, assault, catastrophic loss, didn't just eventually stabilize. Many of them reported, with real conviction, that they had grown in ways they never would have otherwise, deeper relationships, a clearer sense of what actually mattered, a kind of unshakable strength they hadn't possessed before. This wasn't about the trauma being secretly good or something to be grateful for. That idea, understandably, angers a lot of people who have actually suffered, and rightly so. Post-traumatic growth doesn't mean the tragedy was worth it. It means that human beings, under the right conditions, have a genuine capacity to rebuild something meaningful directly out of the wreckage, not despite the pain, but through the very act of wrestling with it honestly. The key phrase there is under the right conditions, because growth wasn't guaranteed for everyone in the research. It only tended to happen when a few specific things were present, and understanding those conditions is really the whole story of what happened to Elena. The first condition researchers identified was this: growth almost never happens through avoidance. The people who eventually grew were not the ones who successfully distracted themselves from what happened. They were the ones who, eventually, found a way to face it directly, often with real support, often in therapy, often slowly and in small doses, but directly nonetheless. For Elena, this looked like finally agreeing after nearly 2 years of resistance to see a grief-specialized therapist. Not because she suddenly felt ready. She didn't. She went because a mutual friend of hers and her late best friends gently pointed out that Elena hadn't said her friend's name out loud in over a year. That single observation landed harder than anything else anyone had said to her since the accident. The second condition was what researchers call meaning-making, the effort, however difficult, to make some kind of sense out of an event that otherwise feels senseless. This is delicate territory because meaning-making isn't about finding a silver lining or claiming everything happens for a reason. For Elena, meaning-making looked like something much smaller and more concrete. She began volunteering, just one Saturday a month, with a road safety awareness program at local high schools. She wasn't trying to justify the accident. She was trying to make sure something real came out of the world that took her friend from her, a decision entirely separate from whether the accident itself made any sense at all, because it never would. The third condition was perhaps the most important and the most overlooked: social support that allows the pain to be spoken, not silenced. Elena's early recovery had actually been slowed, without anyone intending it, by people who loved her so much they tried to protect her from her own grief, changing the subject when her friend came up, avoiding certain topics entirely, treating the tragedy like something too fragile to touch. It came from love. But research on post-traumatic growth consistently shows that environments where pain can be spoken about openly, without panic, without rushing to fix it, are far more likely to produce real healing than environments of careful, well-meaning silence. If this story is landing for you, whether because of something you've lived through or someone you love has, hit like right now. It genuinely helps this reach someone who needs it. And subscribe, because every week we go deep into a real, research-backed pattern like this one. The moment Elena actually noticed her own transformation happened almost 2 years to the day after the accident, at the intersection itself. She'd avoided that stretch of road entirely since it happened. A several-mile detour had become such a fixed habit that she barely registered doing it anymore. That day, for reasons she still can't fully explain, she didn't take the detour. She drove through the intersection. Her hands were shaking on the wheel. Her chest was tight the entire way through. And on the other side of it, stopped at the next red light, she started crying. Not the collapsing kind of crying she'd done for the first year, but something different. Something that felt, strangely, like relief. She said later that it wasn't that the pain was gone. It was that, for the first time, the pain didn't feel like the only thing left of her friend. There was also everything she'd built since. The volunteer work, the harder, more honest conversations with people she loved, a clarity about her own life she genuinely hadn't possessed before the accident, even though she would have traded every bit of it instantly to have her friend back. That's the part about post-traumatic growth that researchers are careful to emphasize, and that Elena herself insists on when she tells this story now. Growth and grief are not opposites, and one does not replace the other. They exist together, permanently, side by side. Elena didn't get over losing her friend. She grew a second, parallel thing alongside that loss, and both are equally true every single day, for the rest of her life. If you're in the middle of something devastating right now, here is the most important thing this research actually says, stripped of anything that could sound dismissive of what you're going through. Growth is not a requirement, and it is not a timeline. Some people never experience post-traumatic growth, And that does not mean they did grief wrong or that they're somehow weaker or less resilient than someone like Elena. Trauma researchers are firm on this point. Growth is a possibility, not an obligation, and there is no correct schedule for healing. But if you are further along and some part of you has started to wonder whether it's even possible to build something real out of what happened to you, the honest answer, backed by real research, is yes. Not by pretending it didn't happen, not by finding a tidy silver lining, but through the same three things that helped Elena: facing what happened rather than perpetually avoiding it, finding some way, however small, to let something meaningful grow near the pain rather than in spite of it, and finding people who can sit with your grief without needing to fix it or rush you past it. None of this erases what was lost. It never will, and it was never supposed to. But it does mean the story doesn't have to end at the wound. Sometimes, given the right conditions and often a great deal of time, it becomes the place something entirely new begins to grow. If you've lived through something that broke you open and some part of you is quietly wondering whether you're allowed to build something new out of it, you are. Not instead of grieving. Alongside it, for as long as both need to exist together. The wound doesn't have to be the whole story. It can become the ground something else grows from, in its own time, on its own terms, exactly the way it happened for Elena. If this story reached you today, hit like. Tell us in the comments about something you've grown from, even if the growth came slowly or came alongside pain that never fully left. And subscribe so you don't miss next week's story. We'll see you in the next one.